Jared here from the Heel to the Face podcast. I'm home from Elimination Chamber, got my commemorative Elimination Chamber hat, passport in hand with another trip to Canada in the books, and we're back in the United States from a cold and very bitter Toronto, Ontario, Canada to a cold New York. But that's just the nature up here. It is crazy that these wrestlers from WWE, right, they see all the climates, because I've walked in to WWE shows in shorts and a t-shirt like I hope to do at a WrestleMania in Las Vegas, and this one, not the same. This one very similar to when I went to Elimination Chamber 2023 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. A real juxtaposition to the WrestleMania that was foreseeing that in Los Angeles. So a very cold and bitter night in one of my favorite cities, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. You can see the Blue Jays logo behind me. They're my favorite Major League Baseball team. But just a takeaway from going to the event. And on this upcoming edition of the Heel to the Face podcast with myself and Brandon, we're going to break down the whole Elimination Chamber and talk about the Raw after, which is taking place this Monday in Buffalo. That I will also be attending, but just going to the event and going to the the experience that is a WWE PLE nowadays. I've gone to both PLEs so far here in 2025. I've been to many before, and what I used to love about going to WrestleMania, and that was normally my only PLE that I really made a point to go to every year, was because nothing else felt like WrestleMania, especially in the last 2 decades or so when it comes to like the superstore, the amount of merchandise that is available for the event, just the overall feel around town when it comes to having a SmackDown, a Raw, other wrestling shows, the banners, the billboards, the advertising around town. It made it feel like it was a huge event. Very similar to imagine when Taylor Swift was in Toronto and she was there for like 2 weeks, took over the town, right? And WrestleMania does that. When you get off the plane at the airport, you see like a WrestleMania sign, and you just don't get that. If I was flying into Buffalo tomorrow, nothing in the Buffalo airport would say WWE's in town. Nothing in downtown WWE is going to say WWE's in town, or in downtown Buffalo is going to say WWE is in town. It's just the event itself. And that's really how every other event outside of WrestleMania felt. For many, many years. I've gone to a lot of PLEs, and for the most part, there would be just, a simple merchandise stand for WWE like you see at really any event, right? One of those merchandise trailers. And there would most likely just be a lot of the wrestler merch that you want to purchase. But when it comes to the event, whether it was like Backlash or Night of Champions or Payback or any of these events, you had an event shirt, right? Unisex, male and female, small, medium, large, extra large, and that was it, right? If you didn't like the event shirt, you didn't have anything that said the event other than your ticket stub. But that has so much changed. Going to the Elimination Chamber at Rogers Center in Toronto, I can tell you, I was not at WrestleMania 6 there. I was not at WrestleMania 18. But when it comes to the overall takeover of WWE in Toronto, I imagine it probably looked bigger at Elimination Chamber than it did for those 2 events, knowing when those events took place. And while those days that those events took place, very big deal. And I know that WrestleMania had an access for WrestleMania 18. So I think WrestleMania 18 probably had a very big feel around town for sure. There's no doubt about it. But just, the fact that, let's say, the Scotiabank Arena, right? The Air Canada Centre at the time, right? Wasn't hosting the SmackDowns and Raws around the event, right? There wasn't a superstore that I imagine at WrestleMania 18 that looked anything like the Elimination Chamber superstore. I mean, they had everything. And not just everything that says Elimination Chamber on it, but like things that were like a mashup of Elimination Chamber and the teams, belts with Elimination Chamber, t-shirts that just were like for Toronto, like Cody Rhodes, Toronto Nightmare, or Kevin Owens, or Sami Zayn, or any of these kind of things. They're not just talking about the Elimination Chamber, but the place they're located overall. It just, when you were in that superstore, and I went, 11 o'clock in the morning yesterday before Elimination Chamber, and it was packed. It wasn't like you're used to feeling when you go to a Monday Night Raw, right? If I went to the arena in Buffalo right now for Monday Night Raw, which is in about 24 hours, the place is going to be empty. But if Elimination Chamber was there in 24 hours, the place would be busy, at least in terms of the stores and the meet and greets and things like that, because that's what I saw, right, with Elimination Chamber in Toronto, all right? I was there only on Saturday, but when I went to Indianapolis, I got there the day prior to the Royal Rumble, and even though, it was Friday afternoon in Indianapolis, it's like the Royal Rumble had already started, right? The advertising all over town. And it's kind of crazy, right? Because the Royal Rumble just started to do that a couple years ago. They started to run stadiums right before the pandemic, and I thought, that's cool. All right, we've got kind of 2 stadium pay-per-views going on now, WrestleMania and Royal Rumble. Cool to see. But now it's like every pay-per-view, right? I went to Payback in Pittsburgh, and while that was only an arena show a couple years ago, they had a store. They had a store for Payback, not for WWE being in town, but like a Payback store with Payback specific merchandise, Payback specific graphing, like to show that we're not just in town like we are normally, but for this specific event. And since Payback, obviously, Elimination Chamber, much larger than that. I can tell you, I've been to a lot of WrestleManias in the past, and I wouldn't say that Elimination Chamber feels like maybe a current WrestleMania does, because that is now on its own level. But I would say Elimination Chamber felt bigger than WrestleMania 23 that I went to in Detroit, or WrestleMania 29 that I went to at MetLife Stadium. And again, not bigger in the sense of like the overall event. When it comes to the card, for sure not, right? Only 4 matches on the Elimination Chamber card. Just the overall, though, like merchandise and signage and the way that it took over the town in such a way. I will say also, too, which, WWE wants to get the most butts in the seats. This event, obviously a B-level pay-per-view in terms of WWE's calendar. I don't know if they consider anything a B-level pay-per-view anymore because, felt like a WrestleMania being at Elimination Chamber last night. But I will say that I did like the setup in the Rogers Center when it comes to a stadium show versus an NFL stadium. And that's probably because Rogers Center is between an arena and an NFL stadium. You probably saw the attendance announced 38,000, right? That's about 18,000 more than an arena. That's about 20,000 less than a stadium. So it's right there in between those two places. And I noticed that kind of difference. And the reason I say I noticed that kind of difference because my seats were in the upper deck. I was dead center with the ring, had an awesome view. I would take those seats all day for WrestleMania, and partly because the ring, was essentially a little bit closer to the fans than it would be at WrestleMania, right? Because it was at the pitcher's mound of the field. So, it's a stadium show. I felt like I was at a stadium show, and I felt like I was at the Royal Rumble at Tropicana Field a couple years ago. I felt like I was at Royal Rumble at, Minute Maid Field. It felt like a stadium show. It didn't feel like an arena show. So it had that stadium vibe, but also, I think, better views for a lot of people. I know there were still some really crappy seats in that stadium for a lot of people. I will say cage matches are not, don't give themselves any, flexibility when it comes to stadiums because it's hard enough to see into the cage if you're at the stadium, let alone if you're a mile away in the nosebleeds of a stadium. It's Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania 39 was not easy to see. The Elimination Chamber, I imagine for a lot of those people, not very easy to see, not even super easy to see for myself. But I will say, I think that's the sweet spot when it comes to having a stadium, but also making it so that the views are not absolutely horrible for everybody there. So that 40,000 mark in a baseball stadium, I think that was the best, right? I loved my seats. I felt like I was high. I was in a stadium, so I was high up, but at the same time, the ring was right below me. It wasn't, 50 yards away from me or something like that. You see at a football stadium. It was right below me. I had a bird's eye view, like you would be from the press box watching a baseball game right behind home plate. I mean, that was my view. I'd take it for WrestleMania all day. Unfortunately, I know WrestleMania, I'm going to have similar seats, but the difference is the ring is going to be a little bit further away from me towards the 50-yard line. So that's my only kind of, takeaway. I wish, we could have stadium shows in which we were in smaller stadiums so you get that bigger than arena vibe, but at the same time, the ring is a little bit closer because we obviously know, when it comes to WWE, they're not raising the ring, they're not elevating it at all, they're not doing those kind of things. So views can be pretty bad. I will say for the people on the rampway, they probably had a better view overall than those who did at Royal Rumble because of the shorter rampway, because of the ring being closer. As I said, I think on this podcast in the past, at Royal Rumble, the people who were right by the entranceway, you saw them slap hands with John Cena and Alexa Bliss and do all that stuff when they came out. But as soon as those wrestlers went to the ring, they turned their backs, put their heads up to the scoreboard, didn't even care to look at the ring because they couldn't see it if they tried. That's how far you are, right? When you're in row 55 on the floor, and the ring's not elevated or anything like that, don't even bother looking in that direction. It's just a waste of time, right? But in this case, I feel like the people who were on the floor, at least in certain aspects, probably had a decent seat, could see things in the ring, as well as, obviously being by the entrances and such. There's obviously bad nosebleed seats, right, off in the corners. There's very bad floor seats. Floor seats are one of those things that are super overrated. If you've never been to a WWE show and you think everything on the floor just means premium, sadly mistaken, right? For floor seats for green shirt guy in row 1, absolutely take them all day. But floor seats, in row 36, 37, way out in left field, no thank you. So when it comes to the experience overall, like the Superstore, I will say I felt it was bigger than, I don't want to say it's bigger than the Royal Rumble store, but pretty close. Bigger than some other stores I've been to in the past, even for, like I said, WrestleManias. Bigger than the SummerSlam store in Cleveland last year. But just overall, Toronto, an amazing city to host this kind of event. People, outside the United States may not understand how big and, important Toronto is culturally and globally. It is a, major city, right? It is not just Cleveland. It is not just Columbus, Ohio. It's not even like, San Antonio, Texas. Crazy how we're at a point now, WWE has 4 matches on a card. And you're thinking, how are you going to essentially sell out a stadium for 4 matches on a card? And unlike the Royal Rumble, the 2 chamber matches were not 1 hour apiece. One was under 30 minutes. One was about 30 minutes. So how are you going to fill 3.5 hours with 2 30-minute matches, one 11-minute match in that women's tag, and then like one 25-minute match in the Kevin Owens Sami Zayn match? I mean, it's crazy to think how you can fill that period of time with just those 4 matches, because we're so used to, back in the day, not even far back in the day, WWE pay-per-views being 2.5 hours long and having like 9 matches on the card, right? And some of those matches being chamber matches, being 30-minute chamber matches. I remember, 2014, 2015, you got 2 chamber matches on the card that are the length of these chamber matches, plus like 5 other matches, and you got it in under 3 hours. So how are they going to spread out this, 4 matches, longer? The chamber wasn't bigger. The chamber didn't last longer. Any of those kind of things. Obviously, we had the big segment at the end that took some time. But, WWE, I appreciate the pacing. A lot of people think, there's a lot of commercials, a lot of breaks. But I think, just everything feels important. Everything feels like it matters. It is crazy nowadays how you can go to a stadium show and not everybody be on the card. I've just been to back-to-back PLEs, right? The Royal Rumble and the Elimination Chamber, right? Back-to-back big PLEs in WWE. Gunther wasn't even, he's not on the card, but he's not even come to the ring. He's not even doing a segment. It's just crazy, that we live in that kind of world right now. Rhea Ripley, the same way, right? She's not on the Royal Rumble card. She's not on the Elimination Chamber card, right? Obviously, she's at both. She's a big WWE star. She's going to be present in both of those cities. But no Rhea Ripley. No Gunther, at either show. Cody Rhodes defending the belt at one of the shows, not the other show. A lot. Charlotte Flair wins the Royal Rumble. Jey Uso wins the Royal Rumble. Neither of them on this card at all. So WWE is doing a lot of different things that, let's just say AEW isn't doing, and that's not a negative to them, but it's just crazy to kind of have that going on, right? Where you have these major stars, major champions. They're not even on these cards. They're not even on these shows. Let's say Motor City Machine Guns and DIY. They had the big 2 out of 3 falls match at the Royal Rumble. Not anywhere near Elimination Chamber, right? I think maybe is that's a way to make WrestleMania feel really special, because obviously everyone's going to be on the card of WrestleMania. Everyone's going to be there, and these other pay-per-views are like kind of, I don't want to say like brand extension pay-per-views, but similar to what you saw back in the day, right? When John Cena might be the champion on one show, but the pay-per-view doesn't have him because Batista's the SmackDown champion. Those kind of things. It's not necessarily a brand exclusive pay-per-view, but kind of feels that way where, yeah, I understand that this guy's a big star, but he's not on this card because he's on a different show or he's got a different story going. So he's a big champion, he's a big star, but he's not going to be involved in this. And WWE's doing that right now, right? Like I just said, no Gunther, no Charlotte Flair, no Jey Uso, no Rhea Ripley, and no Charlotte Flair, no Rhea Ripley, and no Gunther in back-to-back pay-per-view events to kick off 2025. But they do it. It's like, let's be real, right? Elimination Chamber, huge reception, huge pop. Sold out a stadium. This isn't just like selling out the Bradley Center in Milwaukee, or selling out the Sprint Center in Kansas City. This is a stadium show. This is probably, as WWE is going to announce, because of the prices for tickets and how much they charge to let people in the door, I can guarantee you they're going to say this was the most successful WWE show ever at Skydome / Rogers Center history, beating WrestleMania 6, beating WrestleMania 18, because back in those days, you could get in the door for $25, and those days are long gone, right? Back in the day, t-shirts were $30 Canadian, probably $15 American. Now they're like $50 Canadian, all those crazy kind of things. But just, overall, a good show. WWE, they charge high prices, but they made everyone entertained. It was good from top to bottom. And one thing that WWE did at this show that they don't normally do at pay-per-views, because they stick to the scripts, stick to the matches, don't really go off, like have a Gunther come out if he's not on the card, have a Jey Uso come out if he's not on the card, those kind of things. Have those returns, right? Jade Cargill kicking off the show with her big return. Randy Orton coming out, right? Him coming out during the Kevin Owens match. So those kind of things WWE doesn't normally do, right? If they're not on the card, they don't just kind of come out. Gunther didn't just kind of come out at Royal Rumble for no reason. But I think that's part of really taking this and putting us into fast gear for WrestleMania. And I would have expected a lot of these segments like Randy Orton to come back to just be at Raw, or Jade Cargill to come back to just be on Raw, right? Because they're really popping up those shows lately to be very important shows, Raw and SmackDown, to be equally as important as some of these PLEs. So we don't see a lot of that stuff happening at the Royal Rumble, right? We didn't see Sami Zayn and the Kevin Owens thing happen at the Royal Rumble to lead up to Elimination Chamber. They waited till we went to TV. They let it breathe. They let Kevin Owens just lose and move along, right? I thought we were just going to have Kevin Owens win. We move along. Maybe the Randy Orton, Kevin Owens thing happens on television. But they did a lot of stuff at the PLE from promo standpoints and decent match standpoints. Great event overall. Wish it was a lot warmer. Can't wait to be in Toronto when it is a lot warmer in the summer months for Toronto Blue Jays games. And from Money in the Bank, which was just only like 10 months ago, or not even, like 8 months ago in Toronto, which felt like a very big deal then, to this, which feels like an even bigger deal with the Elimination Chamber. It is crazy because as we've talked about many times on the show, Money in the Bank is traditionally one of the new Big Five pay-per-views from WWE. And after watching that last night, Elimination Chamber felt like SummerSlam. It felt like a big deal. It dwarfed, what Survivor Series feels like when it comes to its importance on the WWE calendar. But I can't wait to talk this upcoming week on our podcast. Make sure you're subscribing to the Heel to the Face podcast, where we're going to talk all things Elimination Chamber. Obviously, the heel turn. John Cena for the first time in 20 years. He was a heel for a little bit before he was in movies, before he was anything of importance, but for the first time in 20 years, and for the first time as the John Cena, bigger than life John Cena celebrity character, he has turned heel. And the two-man power trip 2.0, right? Triple H and Stone Cold, they had a big rivalry back in the day, teamed up for the two-man power trip. Rock and John Cena, they've had a little bit of a rivalry back in the day. Are they teaming up for a power trip? And I don't know what Travis Scott, I don't know what his involvement is in any of this, but it's going to be interesting to watch for sure. And I have to say, I'm very critical of WWE all the time. I definitely point out the flaws when I see them. Very upset about The Rock and him taking over the Elimination Chamber prior to the show. But at the end of the day, I have to say, I like where they went with this. I appreciate it very much. I didn't think they were going to go with it. I thought it was going to be some convoluted, stupid story. They went a whole different direction. Love to see it. Kept me on my feet. And one final, takeaway from Elimination Chamber before we wrap up this video is I'm not a huge fan of these post-show press conferences. Back in the day, you watch pay-per-views, it goes off the air, you can't wait to tune into Raw, you can't wait to tune into SmackDown to see what happens, right? You can't wait to follow up. I don't know what these press conferences essentially serve. I don't really know who they're for other than for the media themselves. Most of the media, though, is wrestling media. Asking kind of wrestling-centric questions. And I don't really think that that's necessarily needed during the time of telling a story, right? It's director's cuts right after we watch the movie or in the middle of the movie itself. So I'm not a big fan of the press conferences. Maybe have Triple H come out and just kind of talk about the numbers in relation to, the event itself for the local media, the Toronto media, the people who essentially put the event on. Those things are great, but I don't need to hear from John Cena. I don't need to hear from The Rock. I don't need to hear from CM Punk. I don't need to hear from any of these kind of people. That's what Raw is for. That's what SmackDown's for. I'm just not a fan of these press conferences. I get it. It makes it feel like a real event. Makes it feel like a real sport. But unlike real sports, right, after a game, we don't then, have promos and talk to football players, tons prior to the next game, right? That's why, because that is their chance to talk. That's their chance to get out what they want to say. CM Punk, Seth Rollins, Gunther, Jey Uso, all these people are going to have that opportunity on the television shows proper. So we don't need the press conferences. I think they just kind of muddy the waters, especially with The Rock, who sometimes doesn't know how to shut his mouth, doesn't know how to keep kayfabe. And I get it, kayfabe's dead, but we don't need to bury it. And The Rock is really, he's having a hard time towing that line between being the final boss and burying kayfabe and like ruining the magic during the trick, right? When you go to a David Copperfield show, he might tell you how he did the tricks, a couple of years later on some behind the scenes DVD, but not right after he does every single trick, right? So, we don't really need that from The Rock. We don't really need that in general. I'm over the press conferences. Love the pre-shows. Don't really need the press conferences. Maybe the post-shows, right? Just to kind of to talk about it from the announcer's perspective. But yeah, we don't need the talent in the press conferences. That's just my opinion. You can have a different opinion. I'd love to hear it. But tune in this week. We're going to talk all things WWE. John Cena, heel turn. Huge news. Elimination Chamber, A+ pay-per-view. Really no flaws from top to bottom. And I can't wait to talk on future episodes as we are on the road to WrestleMania, now just 48 days away.